Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there. Hey, everybody, this is Brian. I'm back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and today I want to welcome to a special guest. His name is Pastor John Burke. If you've been with us, if you've been with me for some time, you might remember my conversation with him from a couple of years ago. If you haven't, if you don't remember it, or if you're new, go back to August of 2021, and I had a great conversation with Pastor Burke then. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Imagine Heaven. And I want you to, like I said, go back and look at that episode if you haven't heard it before. But he's also written works including No Perfect People Allowed, Soul Revolution, and Unshockable Love. And they've reached hearts all around the world. Pastor Burke, together with White Catholic, is the spirit behind the Gateway Church in Austin, Texas, which is a spiritual haven for a countless number of souls. He's an international speaker, and his message of spiritual enlightenment has spanned 30 different countries. Today, I'm going to talk to Pastor Burke about his newest work, which is called Imagine the God of Heaven. And the subtitle is God's Revelation and the Love You've Always Wanted. And the subtitle actually leads me into my first question, because I thought that was really caught my eye when I heard that, or caught my ear when I heard that. So, Pastor Burke, can you expand on the God, the love that we've always wanted, and why we feel that way?
Well, first, Brian, call me John.
Okay,
I'm more comfortable with that.
Okay, fine. Yeah,
our church is very casual. We say, come as you are. And so I don't like the titles, but that's all right.
Hey, cool. I understand.
So you forgot one thing in the subtitle: near-death experiences, God's revelation, and the love you've always wanted.
Yes.
So no, it's all right. It's an important part, because as you know, it's my story, really from grief to growth, and my father passing away when, 3 decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave him the very first study on near-death experiences, and I read it, and I was an agnostic, and that set me on a journey, because I was an engineer like you, so very analytical, skeptical, but to me this was like, maybe there's actual some evidence that this is real, and so I've studied thousands of them now over the last 30 years, and this new book, Imagine the God of Heaven, is taking a look at. I've got 70 people in this book from all around the world who not only have a near-death experience, and you've covered those before, so your audience is probably fairly familiar with them.
Yeah, I'd say they are, but we could go over a little bit for people that might be new.
Yeah, because that's really important. Is
sure.
What convinced me and what convinced many skeptical cardiologists, oncologists, other doctors, is when people die, when they clinically die, their heart stops beating, brain waves cease, and yet they're resuscitated. Many come back saying that they experienced something of a life to come that was more real than this life ever was. And there are commonalities. And I've traced about 40 commonalities. There are probably more, but I traced 40 commonalities in the book Imagine Heaven that then I was tying to how that shows up in the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
In Imagine the God of Heaven, what I'm doing is I'm looking at people from all over the globe who not only have that as a commonality, but they have experienced this God of light and love who is more personal than they could have ever imagined, who loves them with, quite honestly, a love that hyperbole is all they can do to try to express it. And in this God's presence, they never want to leave. And so in the book, Imagine the God of Heaven, what I'm doing is I'm showing through the eyes of these 70 people how this God has been revealing himself through history, his heart, his characteristics, his great love story that he's been revealing through history, and how that's what these people are confirming. And it doesn't matter their religious background, their culture. Many times what they would have expected is not what they found, but what they found they never wanted to leave. It was the love they have always wanted.
Yeah. So why do you think that resonates with us so much, that love that we've always wanted? Do you feel like people are missing that here, or what's the reason for that?
Well, yeah. I mean, and that's actually part of the second part of the book. Is it's really about God's great love story revealed throughout the scriptures, and that often gets missed. In the Bible, it starts with people in relationship with God, in very close relationship with God. But then throughout the story, there's rejection, there's betrayal, there's divorce, there's reconciliation, there's sacrifice to try to win back the beloved. There are all these metaphors of relationship that God likens what he wants with humanity to. And then the whole thing ends in the book of Revelation with this great wedding, which is kind of bizarre if you think, like, that's pretty mysterious. Like, what? But if you miss the meta narrative of the whole story, I think you miss a lot of why God does the things he does or doesn't. And the main thing is that love can't be bought. It can't be forced or coerced. It can't be manipulated. It has to be free. And so if God created us for a love relationship first with himself and then with each other, then what's missing on the planet is the first love. And that's exactly what Moses said, what God said to Moses, what Jesus reiterated, that love God first and greatest commandment. Second is love your neighbor as much as you do yourself. Do those two and you fulfill all the scriptures. All the commands of scripture are wrapped up in those two. And so, yeah, I think part of the story of humanity and human life is that we're here learning about free will and love and choosing to choose God. And then choosing to let the love of God flow through us to others as well. And that's one of the commonalities of near-death experiences, of course, all around the world, in the presence of this God of light, who is love, who knows them so intimately. They often get a life review, right? And in that life review, they re-experience. So that's another commonality, is time. I kind of think time probably works in 2 dimensions or maybe 3. It's not our linear one-dimensional timeline. And so they can re-experience their lives in the presence of this God. And he's showing them, they come back with 2 things. One, God is love. And secondly, what he cares most about is how we treat one another. And that's what he was showing them again and again. Like the ripple effect, like Dr. Mary Neal, who I was just recently with. Have you had her on your show before?
I have not had her on my show, but I have met her.
Yeah, sweet, wonderful person.
Yeah.
And she's a spine surgeon, very analytical person as well. But in Jesus' presence, he gives her a life review, and he shows her the ripple effect of every little kind action and how God used even the things that she thought were bad in her life. He showed her how 20 people, 25, 30 people away, that was still having a ripple effect.
So when we talk about the word God, we use the word God, it's a loaded word for a lot of people.
Yeah, I know.
And I've noticed in this community, in the afterlife community, a lot of times, some people shy away from it. I've heard some people who've had near-death experiences say, and I don't know if I want to use that word. So what's your experience with the word God, and how should we relate to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's been a lot of damage done with misinformation about God. And honestly, what I'm trying to do and imagine the God of heaven is show one, just like, if you really understand who this God is that all these people are encountering, you would want to seek him. That's it.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'm trying to show is he didn't just show up in the age of near-death experiences. So I'm tracing what actually convinced me as a skeptical engineer before, even before the evidence of near-death experiences, which I think scientifically, a scientific principle is that what is consistently observed is real.
Mm.
So if you have millions of people around the globe, and I've personally studied thousands of them, my friend Dr. Jeffrey Long has got a database of 5,000 now that he's studied. I mean, there have been many studies. There have been 900 scholarly peer-reviewed articles published on this, like in the Journal of the American Medical Association and the Lancet and Psychiatry. And so there's all this evidence. And then if you look at the fact that close to 50% of them experience who they know is God. And most of them don't shy away from calling him that. They're like, I knew. There was no doubt in my mind. This was my creator. This is who made me. Mm-hmm. And yet that's consistent all around the globe. The being they're describing is consistent. And so that should tell us something. Like, that's a lot of data. And if it were that alone, in chapter 2 of Imagine the God of Heaven, there have been a lot of alternate explanations of near-death experiences, right? Maybe it's hypoxia. It's like the brain suffering from oxygen deprivation. Or maybe it's the same thing, like DMT or ayahuasca produces the same things. I've heard, all these. Or, well, what about the effects of drugs in the hospital and all that? So I go through 10 points of evidence that any alternative theory has to make sense of. Because what I find is, of all these alternative theories, they're taking one thing and saying, well, see, like, DMT. Well, yeah, there's the experience of these wild colors and connectedness to everything. And, sometimes maybe you're traveling or a tunnel or something like that. Well, yeah, but that doesn't make sense of veridical observations.
Right.
So when people have near-death experiences and they're out of their bodies, they say many times they're still in the room up above in a spiritual body watching their resuscitation. Mm-hmm. And there have been studies done where they've come back and 92% of the many observations that these many patients that were studied made, 92% were completely accurate of the things they said were happening in the room while they had no brain waves.
Right.
6% more, there were some things, some of the observations they made were not completely accurate. Only 2% were inaccurate. Well, that's high correlation.
Right.
Like, how do you make sense of that? Second, blind people see when they have a near-death experience and they come back and they're still blind, and yet they said the same things. They had the same experience and even talked about things that they shouldn't have known. Like, they saw things in their life review, for instance, that when they came back, they were able to describe, but they couldn't have seen that. Mm-hmm. Third, you have these overlapping commonalities, but they're not all the same. So like I said, there are like 40 commonalities, right? And if it were just a brain-based thing, then everyone would probably have all the same commonalities, but they don't. They're percentages of overlap, which if you're in a court of law and you have 10 eyewitnesses who all say exactly the same thing, that's collusion. That's sketchy.
Yeah.
Because like they talked.
Right.
But if you have 10 people who say mostly the same things and they overlap, but they're all a bit unique from different perspectives, that's very strong testimony. That's what we see with these NDEs. And then, the other one is, how do you explain people from all different religions seeing the same God? And that shouldn't happen because they weren't necessarily experiencing that. And there are other reasons I go into, but those are just some that convince me, like, no, this is something real. Mm-hmm. We're getting these observations that, again, what's consistently observed is real. Yeah. So there's something real here.
And I'm really glad that you went through that, because I find so many people do not understand what you just talked about, that there is evidence, there's veridical evidence from a lot of these NDEs. People from all across the world are having similar experiences. Because as the explanations that materialists come up with, like oxygen deprivation or a dump of DMT to the brain, they don't explain all of that. So I'm glad you go into that in the book for people that are still skeptical about the whole experience itself.
Yeah.
When it comes to people meeting God, what would you say is a general way that people describe God?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
Well, some see him as a brilliant light, bright. They consistently say brighter than the sun, but easy to look at. And they say things like, I knew this should just burn my eyes out, but it didn't. In fact, I was mesmerized and in his presence. So I love the way this one, that's the other thing about this, Brian, is like the people that I've interviewed, they're like psychiatrists, doctors, commercial airline pilots, nurses. I mean, these are people who have a lot to lose by saying crazy stuff, right? And yet they are. And like this one guy who his name is Dr. Ron Smotherman. He's a neurologist and a psychiatrist, and it's a wild story. He was living in San Francisco, let a guy stay in his house while he was gone. He was doing lectures around the world. When he came back, the guy had a psychotic break and started stabbed him 13 times, once through the neck that doctors said he absolutely should not have survived. He showed me the scars. And on the as the 14th was coming for his heart, he said, time froze. And suddenly appears, like instantly before him, this brilliant light standing there that he knew, again, was divine. He knew this was God. They don't have any doubt of who this is. They have an honest experience. But he said, imagine standing 5 feet away from the point of impact of an atomic explosion. He said that was the energy roiling. This light was just roiling with energy. And then he said, but the energy, what was roiling even more was love. And then he lost it. Telling me this. He said, I'm sorry. It's just like, and that's the other thing, is that this memory for them is not up here in the brain. It's somewhere in their soul, and they relive it as if it were today, and it just overwhelms their emotions because the love is so great. And so he said, instantly he was imprinted with these qualities. And that's what part of what I'm trying to show and Imagine the God of Heaven is the qualities, the heart of God. So he said infinite love, but also instantly infinite knowledge. He said, it's like I had a picture of a library, but the books filled the universe and he wrote them all. And he said power that was indisputable. You know what's fascinating about the power is I had a commercial airline pilot who is flying into like an airborne coming into the city of God, okay? Which ironically, and we'll have to come back to, I have an Indian man who had never read the Bible, taken by this God of light, and he describes this same city of God. So we can come back to that. But both of these guys, this commercial airline pilot and this neurologist psychologist, said, when I saw that light, it was like the very instant a nuclear explosion goes off. The whiteness of that and the brilliance of that, and yet you could look right into it. So power, he said, that's indisputable. Authority is another thing he said. He said, like, you didn't have any questions. He knew, and he knew the right thing, and you wanted to do whatever he said. Humor was another one. And this is one I bring out in the whole last section of Imagine the God of Heaven. There are things about God. I think all of us, me included, we put God in a box. And some of us put him in a box where we don't realize how great, how magnificent, how otherworldly and mysterious and in control and sovereign, all those words you want to use. But others put him in a box, and we don't imagine how personable, how relatable, how even humorous and fun and funny. And some people, like, they can't go there.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to help people do, is stretch your box and see that God is that relationship. And so humor was one of the things he said, and many of them said that they had so much fun. Joy was another thing. And this is an interesting one, because he said the joy was like, you wish you could be that happy. And this is God, that he's that joyful. He said, but just experiencing that joy, he said, put me in ecstasy. Now, here's a wild thing, Brian. And I went there, but I had multiple people that I interviewed, of these 70 people in Imagine the God of Heaven, say things like that. Like, in his presence, I was like beyond anything I've ever experienced on earth. And I said, you mean even like better than sex? They're like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You name it. There's no high, there's no nothing. Which, some people like, no way. But stretch your categories, look at the evidence. Because what I'm also showing is I'm showing that this is not new. This is what God's been revealing about himself all along. Joy is what he wants, because it's his mainstay. Right? That's C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite authors, who was a literary scholar.
Yeah.
Says joy is the serious business of heaven.
Yeah.
And it's true. Another thing that Ron, this guy, said is purity. And I asked him to explain it. And I think it's when religious people use the word holy, I think it's the same thing. He said he was just so pure, so innocent. And he said, but knowledgeable. So not innocent, like naive, but just pure. And he said, what it did is it stood in stark relief to me. And then he said one other thing. He said, and humble. And when he said this, he said, I'm a neurologist, psychiatrist. I've written books. I've traveled the world. I have been proud. He has real reasons to be proud, and yet he was so humble. And again, it brought him to tears just remembering it. And we don't. It's hard for us to put all that into one being, right?
Right.
And yet that's what I think is important to do to more accurately, because we'll never fully imagine God.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Excuse me. I think as you were saying that, people, I think the reason why we have trouble with the word God is because, as you mentioned, we put God in a box. And a lot of us were raised with a God who was less than all of that. And probably the last thing we envisioned God as.
Or maybe people who misrepresented
absolutely
what God's actually like.
Absolutely. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
People representing God in a certain way. I even to this day, I go back and forth with people who are representing the Bible, for example, a certain way. And says the Bible says this, and it's like, and does it really,
Well, and again, think about it this way. So the Bible says a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it honestly depends on the framework through which I'm reading the whole thing. Right?
Yeah, exactly right.
So if the framework through which I'm reading the whole thing is what is right and what is wrong, and I'm doing right and you're doing wrong, and that's the framework, and that's what matters most, it's going to be a hammer.
Yes.
But that's actually not the framework Jesus told us to use. We already talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you love God with all your heart, and if you love people and yourself, if you don't love yourself, you're not going to love people. So it's a both and. It's learning to recognize. This is another cool thing of many of these stories is they say in God's presence, and I have 3 people in the book saying the same thing, and one was an agnostic. Who literally, I tease him, you beat the thief next to Jesus for last minute crying out to God, because he had never prayed, never thought about God, but literally as he's dying of an opioid overdose, before his head hits the steering wheel, he says, God, forgive me. And he and these others, and the reason I point that out is just because this is not what they would have expected. Mm-hmm. Because God was good. Like he didn't require them to have done all the right things. All he required is their heart turning to him. Because that's the point, love. And he can't force love. So the thing Jesus said is love God, love people. That's the framework through which we've got to also read the Bible and understand what all that means. So it doesn't mean the command to not lie is wrong. It means it's not loving.
Right.
Right. But if someone does lie, well, do you just beat them down and tell them how horrible they are and they're worthless people because they did that and treat them like that? Well, that's not loving. So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. You mentioned the agnostic man. You also mentioned an Indian man who saw the city of God. So that comes back to, do we have to be Christian to experience God in heaven?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe the NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.grief2growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, you're asking the Christian pastor. You're leading me into the trap.
Oh, I don't mean to lead you into a trap.
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. But there is something. I think so. I think some of us have been burned by Christians who have not understood the magnitude of the grace of God, and as a result have led people to believe that God doesn't care about anybody but us. That's not true. And I'm showing that in the very first 3 chapters. It's called God of All Nations. Okay. But the other side of it is what these people experience. So, for instance, Santosh Akarchi was this Indian manufacturing engineer. So again, very smart people. He traveled the world doing engineering, but he was raised in Hinduism. His dad was a Sanskrit scholar. That was all he knew. The Hindu gods was all he knew. He dies. He hears code blue. His pancreas ruptured, and he hears code blue. They couldn't revive his heart, and they put him on artificial life support for 3 days. 3 days later, when he comes back, he tells what happened. He left his body. He sees his body there. This brilliant light comes, and he knows it's a divine light. He says, and I knew this light had ultimate authority, and I had to do whatever it wanted. He said, but I fell in love with this light. That was his first response. And then they travel. And he said it was like through tunnels, right? And that's another one of the commonalities. But they come to this place where the light stops, parked over what he describes as this giant compound. Now, I've been to India many times, and at first I was like, what do you mean compound? And it took me a while to figure out what he was saying. But in India, there are compounds, literally like high-walled areas, gated. And he said it was like that, but these beautiful walls, high walls, inside this beautiful like landscape, but mansions and buildings of otherworldly material, and it was square in shape, thousands of miles long. And he said, when you're there, your eyesight is like telescopic. Well, that's another commonality as well. But he said, and there were 12 gates. I counted them.
Wow.
And outside the gates were angels. And that's when I realized I'm looking at the kingdom of heaven. And he said, all I wanted was to enter there. He said, I realized that's the goal of existence, to be there. So he experiences, and if you've ever read Revelation 21, and you look at his words, it's like that's what he's experiencing.
Yeah.
You know? And then he's like, where am I? And again, this is an experience more real than he said, more real than anything we've experienced here. And he says, where am I? And he looks, and he's up on a high platform, and he looks down to his left, and he describes an abyss. He describes hell. And he's like, I want to go there. I don't want to go there. He turns and he sees who he describes as God now in the appearance of a giant man on a throne. That's what he describes.
Interesting. Okay.
I know. I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
This is just what he told me. And he looks into his eyes, and he gets a life review, like he sees all of it, the good and the bad, and he falls to his knees and he says, God, forgive me, because he realizes all the wrongs he had done. And then the Lord speaks to him, and he says, I was shocked because there was such tenderness, such compassion, such mercy in his voice. And he said, I'm going to send you back. And when you go back, I want you to love your family, especially your daughter. She needs your help right now. So see, this stretches everybody's categories, right? Is that He's the God who is with us, all of us. And he knows everything intimately about everyone we interact with, and he cares about all of us.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. If you miss that, you miss the big picture.
Right.
But we can also reject him. And that's what Santosh was also seeing. And so then he sees right next to this throne what he calls a very narrow door that was open to me. And he could go into the kingdom of heaven. And he asked the Lord, he said, when I come back, and he said, because there was such mercy and compassion and love in his voice, I started to relax. And I said, when I come back, how do I go through that narrow door? And the Lord said, and he was thinking about religion, like, what religion do I choose? What do I go to?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he was thinking, which temple or synagogue or church or do I go to? And the Lord said, what I want is relationship, not 1 day a week, 365 days a year. How honest will you be with me?
Mm.
How real, how sincere, how honest will you be with me? And then he said, the wages of sin is death. Walk with me and surrender yourself daily to me. And then he sends him back.
Oh.
2 years later, his daughter is invited to sing in a choir at a church because she was a choral major. Santosh goes to hear her sing, and the pastor is speaking on the passage in John 10 where Jesus says, you know, or in Matthew 7 where he says, you know, I am the gate. I am the gate into the kingdom of heaven. And then John 10 where he says, you know, I'm the gate and the sheep will come in and out. And Santosh goes and he starts reading the Bible and he's like, that's what I experienced.
Interesting. Wow.
Now, if that were one story, you go, one story. But I'm showing just in the first 3 chapters and throughout, I've got stories from people all over the world. Bibi, who was a Muslim related to the Prophet Muhammad living in Tehran, who in her near-death experiences the same almighty giant in a robe and a beard, white hair though, right?
Yeah.
That Santosh did, who says to her, I am he who is, in Farsi.
Ah, okay.
She can't speak English. So she told me this through a translator.
Okay.
And I was like, you got to be kidding. I am he who is. Well, when Moses asked God, who am I to say sent me? You know, when he's to deliver this is in Exodus, God says, I am who is.
Mm-hmm.
I am the self-existent one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's what Jesus said of himself. Before Abraham was born, I am. So she and she also, you know, comes to start following Jesus, and then has to leave Tehran because they were going to kill her.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not all free everywhere, you know. In fact, another Muslim imam from Rwanda that I interviewed, that's in the book, and it's a fascinating story too. Awesome story. His mother was a Tutsi, his father was a Hutu during the Rwandan genocide. And it drove their family apart. He ends up a street kid at 8 years old, doing drugs, then dealing drugs. Then he becomes an imam in the mosque. And anyway, long story short, he dies of blood cancer. And he says, who was there was a man like he saw in the movie The Passion of the Christ, because he got free movie tickets and he went to see The Passion of the Christ. And he says he enters and he's in this white robe with a beard, but light coming out of him like the sun, but I could look at him. And he shows me, and he sees holes in his hands. And he says to him, I died for mankind. You are one of those I died for. Never deny it and tell everyone.
Wow.
And he's still in Rwanda,
Right.
and he's now an Anglican priest, and he's had 6 attempts on his life.
Oh, wow. Wow.
What would convince someone to do that?
Yeah.
And I mean, you can go watch my video interviews with him, and And so the point is all over the globe. There's another Indian man who, Dr. Rajiv Parthi, maybe you know of
Yes,
his
he's been in
story.
my program. Yeah.
Oh, he has?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if he told you his whole story, but
Yes.
he came back confused too, because it's like, why did these Christian angels bring me to this God of light, who then later, when I ask, "Who are you, Lord?" says, "I'm Jesus, your Savior."
Yeah.
But this is happening all over the globe.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you're tying this back to the Bible and stuff, because, and when I asked you the question, earlier, I didn't mean to lead you into a trap, but I do for a reason. I moderate a board on Facebook, and just last couple of days, people are telling me NDEs are not biblical. NDEs, they're deceptions. And then one guy I was telling, about this, and he said, well, I said something about a Catholic person. He goes, well, Catholics are all deceived too. So these are some of the people.
I've got a priest. I've got multiple Catholics who met the same God, and this guy became a priest because of his encounter with this God.
Right. So
and so, Brian, that's the thing that just is so difficult, and that's what I'm trying to show. I'm trying to show, there's a lot of misinformation out there about God, and a lot of us, all of us misinterpret. I'm not completely right. I'm not even claiming to be. But if you look at all the evidence, and that's what I'm trying to put. I'm trying to put the biblical evidence, because I've studied it for 3 decades.
Right.
And I'm also trying to put, I really think God is showing us in this global age of communication that he's the God of all nations, and he always has been. And you know what a lot of Christians don't understand, Jesus said this a lot. And, you even, like in Acts chapter 10, God basically reveals to Peter, he's the God of all nations. And he has Peter go to this Roman centurion. Well, they were idol worshipers. They were the pagans, right? They were the outcasts to the Jews. And Peter's like, I would never do that. Why would he never do that? Well, because his culture told him, God loves us, not them.
Right.
And he says, he realizes what God's telling him is, and he says this, it says, I now realize that God does not show favoritism. He accepts everyone from all nations, basically he said, who fear him or seek him and do what is right. And so, in Imagine the God of Heaven, one of my favorite stories, a good friend of mine now, when I was on a New York national news show, she emails me afterwards. This is after Imagine Heaven. And she's a nurse. She was a nurse in LA, name's Heidi. And she said, hey, I saw you on that TV show. I don't know who you are. I've never read your book, but that happened to me. I was raised in an atheist, agnostic, Jewish family. But when my horse landed on me and crushed me, I was up in the air with Jesus. I've never told anyone that. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's all she said.
Wow.
And so I was like, Heidi, we got to talk. And we've become good friends since then. But what's fascinating, and her story is in Imagine the God of Heaven as well. But what's fascinating is her dad had a mantra. And, Brian, a lot of our animosity toward God and toward people comes from our own hurt, unhealed. And you know that, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, even in grief work, there's a lot of, just the pain of not working through griefs and stuff like that. And then, but her dad, who was actually pretty abusive, had a mantra: there is no God. Your life is worthless. Jesus Christ is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind.
Oh, wow.
And he told his 3 daughters that every night their whole growing up years while being abusive.
Wow.
Well, she always believed in God, and she prayed to him every night. And she felt that she felt like she would pray to him and she'd talk to him about all these things happening, and she felt a comfort.
Hmm.
In fact, she felt like he was there kind of rocking her to bed. That's what she felt. At 16, after going through her bat mitzvah and being raped by her rabbi, or being sexually molested by her rabbi,
Wow.
I mean, it's a pretty horrific story. But at 16, she's in a horse riding accident, and her horse lands on her and crushes her. And she instantly left her body. She said she was up 30 feet above the accident, watching her sisters freak out, but she felt great. And she said, my only concern was for my sisters. I knew I was dead, but I was great. But I just hated that they had to see me die like this. And then she sees a light over her shoulder, moves up, and there with her 30 feet in the air is Jesus. And he looks like you would think Jesus would look, except he's brilliant, but she recognized him. And she said, I said, oh, hey. And she said, it was like an instant reconnection. She said, I knew this man. I knew him. And she later said, I can't explain how God can be a light, and God can be love, and God can be a man, but that's what I experienced. And Jesus gave her a life review. Remember, she's 16, right? So he gives her a life review. And in the life review, first of all, they laughed. She said, their butts off. Because like one thing that happened was when she was an infant in a crib, and her mom, put another infant in there, and the infant picked up her little plastic rattle and whacked her on the nose. And Heidi just like gets indignant and starts to cry and all that. And they just both burst out laughing because they knew she wasn't really hurt. She was just mad, right? But they could tell all this. And she said, Jesus just loved to laugh. And she said he was so fun. But he also showed her in her life review that when she was a young girl and she was praying to God every night, he was there. She saw him there sitting by her bed, comforting her. Wow. In her life review.
Wow.
And I think that's what this shows, is that, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And this God of light also appeared to Moses, 3,500 years ago, as this burning bush that wouldn't burn the bush. Yeah. Right? This brilliant light that didn't burn the bush. And on and on, you can trace it through. And what I think this shows us is God has always been about drawing people back to himself. That's what he's doing. He's the whole purpose of Jesus coming and dying on the cross was to make a way that we don't have to pay for all our wrongs. That God in his justice would be willing and able to both be just and to forgive anybody who wants him. That's it.
Yeah.
Anybody who wants him.
Yeah.
If you want him and you want his love, nothing can keep you away from him, because nothing can keep him away from you.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing, is that he's with us already. He's with everyone already.
Yeah.
Now, in different ways. Even the person who rejects him. And there are people in the book who he said that to them. It's like in their life review, this one guy who was a medical executive and a CEO, and in Jesus' presence, he's getting this life review, and Jesus is showing him all these times he suffered as a kid. He suffered a lot. He was in the hospital, he had bad asthma, he was overweight, he was bullied. And he's showing me all, and he says, why are you showing me these things? And then he kind of had an aha, and he said, were you there with me? Even through all that, even before I knew you? And Jesus looks at me and said, yes, I was there. waiting for you to turn to me. And then a really cool thing is at a later point, he's just experiencing a similar kind of like ecstatic joy. He's by, he's by this river in heaven, this gorgeous place, and he's by this river and he drinks of this water. And he said it was just like he again said ecstasy. they say that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he turns to Jesus, and Jesus is holding a flask, like a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "What is that?" And Jesus said, "I've been collecting your tears, beloved."
Mm.
And then he pours them into the river.
Mm.
And Randy instantly knows he's returning all my sorrows for joy.
Wow.
And then
I want to ask you this, because you talked about, you mentioned something about even those who reject him. I think it was a phrase you used. Are you familiar with the work of Thomas Talbot? He wrote a book called The Inescapable Love of God.
No.
Okay, so he argues that if we knew who God was, and if we were in our right minds, having those two conditions, you could not reject God. And the God I hear you describing, the way, the joy and the love and the laughter, how could anybody possibly reject that?
It's even better than that.
Yeah. So
I mean, Heidi was a speed freak, right? She rode horses bareback and just loved speed.
Mm.
So they're up 30 feet in the air. After getting a life review, Jesus grabs her hand. I didn't even tell. I went ahead and put it in the book, but in the end, because I figure if it's too soon, they'll check out because they won't believe it. Because that was my first reaction, like, no way. He takes her hand and they take off. And she said at first, it was like we were going through Earth's atmosphere and then out into like the universe, but they're going faster and faster. And she said we were flying like Superman and Lois Lane, but being pushed by a wave of light. She said it was like we were surfing this wave of light, and I could feel that I was barefoot because I could feel it on my feet. And I reached in and I touched my hand to it, and I look over at Jesus, and he's just grinning ear to ear, and he says, "Isn't this the coolest ever?" Well, there are a lot of Christians who like right now are checking out, like, no, that's
Right.
God can't be like that.
Right.
But he is like that. Jesus's last night on earth said, I'm telling you these things so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete.
Right.
And see, what I go into in the book that I think many Christians miss is that everything we love, every wonderful experience, every pleasure, every adventure, all the things we love about life, we only do because he made us with the ability to love them.
Yeah, exactly.
And he actually enjoys us enjoying them.
Right.
I love enjoying things with my granddaughters.
Right.
If I give them a gift, I enjoy playing it with them and seeing them enjoying it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'm not better than God.
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to the title of the book that was mentioning. He calls it The Inescapable Love of God. It's like, it's so attractive that no one in the right mind could turn away. I think what people reject is the limited view of God that we have, that the heaven that sounds boring, right? I don't want to go to a place where I'm going to be sitting on a cloud playing a harp all day, singing songs for 10,000 years.
And that's not it. And you read the stories of these people and the eyewitnesses of these people all over the world, and you realize, okay, they're either whacked, and there are millions of whacked people, but still, like I said, I put all that evidence, like it doesn't make sense,
right?
Unless there's something real here. But what they say is it's more real. Now, what does that mean? I've as an engineer, I've thought a lot about that. And I think this is what they mean. So imagine if this, we're living in 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. We can't even imagine a fourth dimension of space and a second dimension of time, 5 dimensions, right? We can't fathom it.
No, you can't.
But we can, and we can understand it by analogy. So imagine this experience is being lived on a flat black and white painting on my wall, and death means separation. So your soul leaves this 3-dimensional realm. So your soul is peeled off that flat black and white 2-dimensional realm where you only knew up and down and side to side. You didn't even know in and out. That's not a dimension you're familiar with at all.
Mm-hmm.
Now you come out and your 2-dimensional self is now experiencing 3 dimensions and color in this room that was all around you, and you're contained within this bigger reality that's more real. Then imagine being pressed back into that flat 2-dimensional world and trying to describe 3 dimensions of color in black and white 2-dimensional terms.
Right.
That's why the more of these people I've interviewed, I've realized they have to use hyperbole. That's why some of the people in the Bible who have also experienced the same thing, there are a lot of them talking about what they saw or experienced in heaven. And it was like this, So the city was like gold, but transparent like glass.
Right.
Well, what does that mean? Well, when you hear a manufacturing engineer say, well, it was otherworldly materials. And then you hear both a spine surgeon and a commercial airline pilot who'd never read the Bible before talking about how it appears like glass or crystal, but it's actually light and love. Like this place is made of light and love. And they say, I know that doesn't make any sense, but that's what it was. And I ask them, like, but was it real? Was it like physical and solid? Oh yeah, more than this.
Right.
Like hugs are like real. Oh yeah, much deeper than this. I mean, communication and thought and memory is all the same. Oh yeah, but you understand completely. It's thought to thought. Nothing's misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. I know what I saw from one of the notes you sent me, and I love what this says. Is we're gonna find it. You said basically that the NDE kind of puts color onto what's kind of black and white. I think in the Bible, and having this conversation with you, I can tell. And when you talk to people that have had NDEs as much as you have, it becomes infectious, and I can see it. I can feel it coming through you, and so you're making us.
Well, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And that's the thing. Like, I just wish everyone could know all the things you long for. They are available.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we long, it's another C.S. Lewis quote. If you have a thirst for something that nothing on earth can quench, it probably means we were made for something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that quote by C.S. Lewis. I think
which I just butchered, by the way.
Yeah, but he indicates we don't have a longing for something that doesn't exist. So he talks about these things that we long for, that there's got to be a reason.
Thirst and there's water. Yeah. We hunger and there's food. But we want a love that never completely satisfies. We want a peace that it comes and goes. We want a joy. We get little glimpses and then it's back to mundane.
Right.
And we picture that that's how heaven or God's going to be, but that's not it. It's like these longings, these desires are good, but there's something missing. And it's kind of like that homing device in birds that, how do they fly thousands of miles and hit their target every year?
Right.
Well, it's like something in them knows what home actually is, and it just points them there.
Yeah, it just said that. It reminded me of a woman I interviewed. She had a near-death experience when her husband murdered her, but she's in heaven and she's with her sister and they're laughing and she's like, it's just too much joy. She said it was just too much. I felt like I was going to explode. I didn't know if I could contain all of it. And I've heard several people
that I've interviewed in the book say that.
Yeah,
I said I felt like I was going to just blow up. One guy, I love this. He's an Australian lawyer, and he said, I was in God's presence and it was like he was filling me up with love and joy so much. I felt like I was going to burst, and I thought, I don't know if I can take anymore. And he said he heard a chuckle from God, and then it starts to go down. And he said, no, don't stop. And then more. But yeah, again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you having this conversation again with me today, and remind people the name of the book and where they can get it and where they can find out more about you.
It's Imagine the God of Heaven, and you can go to imaginethegodofheaven.net, or johnburkeonline.com. Right now we'll take you to the same place. You can find out more about it.
John, again, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your joy with my audience.
Well, it's not my joy, and everyone can have it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. See you, Brian.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grief2growth.circle.so. That's grief2growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.